Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits. The rebels. The troublemakers. The round pegs in the square holes. The ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them. Because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
Hey friends, Marc Mandel here. Welcome to episode number 10 of Customer Experience Unsung Heroes. We've made it to episode 10. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. It's been quite a ride so far, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. Today is going to be a great show and one that I'm thrilled to share with you. We're going to spend, just for some housekeeping, first a little 40, 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes together, but certainly we'll be done well within the hour. Of having a really good time together today, talking about some important topics that I think are weighing on a lot of our minds and our hearts right now as CX folks that I really want to dig into today. But first, I want to give you just some context for this show. I call it Unsung Heroes, and if you've not seen earlier episodes, what this is really about, it's my interest, my desire to bring some of my friends who I think are some of the best, most thoughtful, most smart people who are doing the real work around making these businesses that they're connected to or missions that they're on happen. But it's not the people that are often out there on conference stages getting, trophies or recognition or public accolades. These are people I like to say are doing the work back in the engine room of these companies, really making sure that things are just going the way they need to go. Today is exactly that. We're going to bring out a dear friend of mine in a few minutes. But I want to just think back on a couple of earlier episodes of this show. For those that have seen some earlier episodes, you may remember a show I did with my friend Stacy Neville from Prudential Insurance, or even a gentleman named Brian Graves who used to be at Redbox. These people are the types of people I talk about. These are people who are in their companies, getting stuff done, working around, making the wires connect so that things that are happening with people around them are really happening the way they have to happen. That's really the goal of this show, is to bring these good, hardworking folks to the surface and give them, 20 minutes of much deserved recognition. And that's what I want to do here with you today. For those of you that are hitting this show live, thank you. You may be seeing it on LinkedIn or maybe over on our YouTube channel. We have a really nice following on LinkedIn. We've seen having thousands of people now on LinkedIn. YouTube, not so great right now. YouTube, I think I have 4 followers out there, one of which is my wife and another one of which is my brother. So YouTube, work in progress. LinkedIn, it's gone really well. So whichever channel you're on or whichever platform you're on, thank you. For those that are seeing this show live right now, today is May 20th. I want to encourage you to jump in on the comments side of the screen, the dialogue side of the screen, interact, ask questions, provoke us, challenge us to think differently. If we say something in this show that doesn't resonate with you, say it's not resonating, or if it does, say that. I would really appreciate your feedback as the show plays out. I think that messaging feature is important. So as we get started, one of my favorite parts of any one of these shows that I do is what I keep calling my Customer Experience Book Club segment. It's where I take a book that I really think highly of, and I buy copies for you if you want a copy. I'm more than happy to send them out as my gift. So for those of you who've been around this show before, you've seen this book before. I've given copies of this book out to dozens of you guys over the last 9 or 10 months. It's a book that I feel deeply deeply committed to the point where I helped write some of this book with my friend Carl Charisse here. It's called CX Pro Beyond the Basics, Advanced Insights for Customer Experience Professionals. It's not a big book. It's 100 some odd pages, 126 pages, but I think it's well put together. And if you'd like a copy, I'd be more than happy to share a copy with you as my gift. Just hit me up and say, send me a copy of Carl's book, and you'll have it. I think it's really terrific. Another quick housekeeping thing while we're together. We're sitting here now at the end of May. We've made our way through a lot of what I'm going to call conference season. Conference season where you may remember we had the Qualtrics conference, the Medallia conference, a couple of contact center conferences over the last couple of months. And there's one more big conference coming up in a few weeks' time that I want to make sure is on your radar screen. If you're looking for what I consider to be, I don't know, the Woodstock of customer experience conferences, this is it. This is the Forrester Research CX conference. They call it CXNA, or Customer Experience North America. It's held every year. The last 2 or 3 years was in Nashville, Tennessee, where it will be again in this June. The dates are the 23rd of June until the 26th of June. It's a great event. If you really want to go to one CX event this year, that's the one. Take a look at the website. It's on the Forrester website, and then come to me. I have, thanks to a couple of my platform partners that I do some work with, discount passes that I can give away. I think it's 20% off the ticket price, which is substantial. It's hundreds of dollars that you'll save if you take a code from me and put it in during the registration process. That code is only good, though, until the beginning of June, so only maybe another 2 weeks before those codes expire. But hit me up, and I'll make sure if you want to go to the Forrester conference next month in June, and I hope you do, hit me up and let me know if you want. I'll hook you up with one of those discount codes for a pass. Every year at the beginning of these years, in January or sometimes February, some of us do New Year's resolutions. I've not done a New Year's resolution in a long time, but CX folks like to say, this is going to be the year of fill in the blank, the year of understanding, the year of empathy, the year of growth, the year of alignment. I think this is going to be an interesting year as it plays out with all the craziness going on in our world. And my friends, I'm not just talking about politics. There's so many strange anomalies going on, one after the next in our world, weighing on us right now. I think this is going to really be the year that we take a step back and we start thinking that we need to treat each other better. We need to treat each other like humans. As customer experience people, we try to set a standard for how we treat our customers, and we call that our best practices. And it's going to be, our customer experience blueprint. If we're employee experience people, we have an EX blueprint. And sometimes those are not even the same as each other. At the end of the day, I think that there's just an easier way to look at this. I think if we can establish that 2025 is the year that we understand that we're all just part of a larger group of people called humanity. Some of us are customers, some of us are coworkers, some of which are competitors, professionally speaking, some of which are just friends. What if we can just say, let's treat each other all following that golden rule? Remember the golden rule from when we were kids? Treat each other the way we want those to treat us. I think that that's probably the single best standard that we can operate by, whether in all circumstances. Right? It could be, how do we treat our customers? Treat them the way we want them to treat us. How do we treat our coworkers or our employees? Same deal. I think that the more that we can start to apply that golden rule of thinking, the more we're going to find success in everything we do, especially in this concept of humanity being the quote unquote audience. I think we're all people. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what role we play. We're just people, and we have kind of pre-wired needs in our DNA. And one of those is to feel connected with others in a human level. And that's what I really want to drill into for the rest of this show, is connecting as humanity We're no longer going to talk about customer experience, employee experience. We're going to talk about HX, or the human experience, because I think that, my friends, is where the rubber hits the road. It was just a year ago, some of you may remember that an old friend of mine, Bruce Temkin, went out on LinkedIn one day, it was probably just a year ago, in fact, and announced to the world that he left his job at Qualtrics to start a movement called Humanity at Scale. And I remember calling Bruce, and I went, Bruce, what the heck is that? And he said at the time, I'm not real sure yet, but I think it's time that we treat each other better. And I want to create a movement, he said, to promote this thinking that we want to just treat each other like we truly care, that these are just humans connecting with other humans. Again, it's not for purpose of selling something or buying something or profiting or competing. It's just a way to really connect with one another. And now he's a year into that journey. And I could tell you, I think if you've been following his writing and his talking, I think you're going to find that there's a lot of goodness to what Bruce is doing out there. Here's the deal. I have to tell you a personal story for just a couple of minutes, and I'm going to spare you a lot of the gory details. It goes back about 20 years ago. My mom at the time was very, very sick with cancer, and she eventually had some challenges with some treatments, and she passed away not long after that. And after the dust had settled, and we kind of moved forward with our lives, I remember calling the gentleman who was the CEO of the company who was caring for her at the time when she passed away. And I remember asking him, not to challenge him, not to threaten him, but I remember asking him, what happened with her? If you remember her case, what happened with her case? What happened? And he started talking about, how they operated to the letter of the law, and this rule and this statute and this rule and that statute, and how they checked all their boxes from a compliance perspective. And he went through this. He gave me like a half-hour speech about how they were perfect operationally. And I remember the conversation turned on a dime when I said, that's awesome. But how would it have been different if she was your mother? And I could tell you that there was just total silence and fallout at that point. He had no answer. But I think that is an intriguing question. How would the treatment that he gave her have been different if she was his mom, not mine? I think there's a level of standard that we can all agree exists in how we connect with one another and how we show each other love and care that goes beyond being a legally compliant customer and treating somebody like you truly care. And I think that, my friends, is the goal that we all should work toward. My old friend in the customer experience industry, Gene Bliss, even wrote a book, I think it's now 7 or 8 years ago, that you can surely find on places like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, where she talks a lot about, that mom standard. And I think that, interesting enough, that title in her book came out just not long after the interaction I had with that gentleman. And so I could really relate to her book and couldn't wait to buy a copy and read a copy. And I encourage you to check that book out too, if you're interested. But that mom standard, I think, is where it's at. I have a really special friend I want to talk about, and I'm going to bring him onto the show here in just a second. My friend and I go back, probably 15 or almost 20 years, where we've met professionally. I had the privilege of thinking of Steve first as a client and then as a friend. And that friendship evolved and really blossomed over the years. And there are very few people on earth that I'm more grateful for than a gentleman named Steve Marble. And so I have the good luxury of asking Steve to join me on this show today, where we're going to talk a lot about this idea of the human connection and human experience, because I know Steve believes deeply in that. And so I thought, without further fanfare, let's bring Steve out onto the stage here. Hey, there he is.
Mark.
Hey, Steve. Uh, Steve, thanks for hanging out with my friends and me today. I was just kind of spending 10 or 15 minutes talking a lot about things like treating one another to a standard we can aspire to if the person we're talking about is somebody as important to us as your mom, right? How I call it the mom standard. Would you treat your mom the way you treated this person? And if the answer is no, then why are you doing it? Right? I mean, I think there's something really to be said for that. But before we get into this whole idea of treating humanity better and what does that mean and how do you do it, I could sit here, Steve, and think I know everything there is to know about you after all these years that we've been together, but my friends listening may not. Could you take just a couple of minutes and just talk about you and kind of who you are so that people know who I have the pleasure of speaking with here the way I do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Mark, and hello everyone that's on. Yeah, glad to. When I try to describe myself, Mark, I would just say I am just a good old country boy raised in the Midwest. Life for me was just like probably your neighbor, pretty normal. I've been very blessed that I have worked with some of the best leaders, best minds, and possibly some of the not so best. And I have paid attention. And I believe that's really what the journey of life is about, is we pay attention, we learn, we apply, we transform, and we elevate, evolve, grow. That's who we become. And so through my journey, I won't say exactly how many years, but I started as an entrepreneur, had my own business for just over a decade. Then I went into the corporate space and kind of worked my way through business development. But I landed in really generalist leadership role over a contact center. Never been in one before. I was hired by a very large publishing company to start. It was during the growth years. It was Scholastic. It was the growth years for Harry Potter. So we were kind of all learning. And if you think about it, like the internet really came to the public in the 90s. That was about the time I was coming. So it was still very phone driven, very personal. And I applied that small business mentality and then working in some manufacturing roles to this generalist role. But I learned so much from those I brought around me. I built a team from people I did not know, a community I had to get to know. And I just learned so much from them. And I think if I were to describe myself, I put myself through night school. My education was always on my own dime. I worked my way through that. But that's just something we all learn to do. What I learned through all that is what you said. It's the way we treat others. We're relational creatures. It's relationship. I would offer possibly an amendment even to the golden rule. I do unto others as you'd have them done to you. Absolutely. I would even offer potentially maybe a little platinum circle around that says, and as they would like to have done unto themselves, if at all possible. Because there's times they may not want what I want for me. And, being a HX approach is I need to listen. I need to learn. I need to engage and understand and get perspective, because I do live by the rule that the customer's perception is reality. And so if indeed that's how they see it, then I need to engage there. So that's who I am. I really come from the kind of, I use these terms because I'm a country boy, the good old boy approach. I have educated myself, and worked in some wonderful environments, New York, and places where I've met so many sophisticated people. But at the core, we are who we are. And it's really when we strip it down to the human nature of it all, and it comes down to the reality of treating others well. It's really comes down to those 5 roots I write about in my book, and I'm sure we'll get to that later. But it's really treating other people with respect and encouragement and committing to them and encouraging, and those things we do as far as being authentic leaders. So I'll just stop with that. But that's who I am when I do get a chance to speak to people. I just try to be very authentically who I am. I'm no one great. I hope I am one of those friction that you saw in the video earlier. I love that video where maybe I am just crazy enough to make a difference. I just feel compelled to share the stories that I've learned and observed and applied, and hopefully introduce that to other people's journey.
Steve, I show that video at the onset of this show every episode for a reason. Because I'm an Apple guy. I just think that I love companies, big and small, that kind of represent mission-oriented companies.
Mm-hmm.
And Apple, to me, was a challenger, mission-oriented company. Now they're a behemoth. But, there was a time when they were the little guy, and
Yeah.
IBM was the big guy, right? And how would the little guy survive, and had to be, out engineering, out thinking, out operating, but mostly out connecting the bigger guy so that little Apple could win. And when, as you pointed out, the end of that TV ad, that tagline in the last 8 seconds of the ad, that says, the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. I still get chills when I think about that. I still think, I go, boy, that's something. And I don't know that I could ever become that, but it sure sets an interesting standard to strive for, right? To say, I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that really elevated everything by just a little bit. And you were talking before about the human nature of wanting to connect and to be committed to developing and to committing to doing things better. And this just plays off that exact same feeling, I think.
Yeah. I tell my teams, you made me think of something there, Mark. I always tell my teams I expect a good learning mistake every day and don't waste it. And some people think that's funny. Like, it's a joke. I'm serious. It is funny. Because if we don't try and make mistakes, then we're all conforming inside the same guardrail. So we're swimming in the same lane, doing the same thing, frothing up the water. There's all this other vast space out there that we could try something new, try something different. You may not be getting it right, but you'll learn from that mistake. So don't waste it and learn from it. And that's really what where I saw you going with that is like, it is those people who say, yeah, I'm crossing the fence. I think I like what's over there, and I'm going to go try those berries and see what that's like. And that's the ones that make a difference. And that's what I think that's the human experience is staying connected enough to the crowd that you're not lost, but that you are adventuring. And then you come back, and that makes us better together.
I hear your anecdote there, and clearly it's a very interesting allegory behind it. I can't help but notice over your shoulder a book that you're rightfully very proud of. I like to take a moment and talk about The Monkey in the Maze. What's that book about? Tell me a little bit about the backstory to that book.
Yeah, thank you for that. So when I was working through my career path, just life in general, my absolute best friend, my wife, we've been together now almost 40 years, and just, absolutely my go-to. And I think any leader would tell you they have that person that's not in the circle where you're making decisions, but is the concentric circle you're inside of. They're not a Venn diagram. They're like around you. And that's her. And so she's everything to me. And so as my journey was going through career and different things, she battled cancer a number of times. And the final time the last time, the hardest one, and she's in remission today. So I want spoilers. I'm blessed to still have her. It was a terrible, hard battle, 11.5-hour surgery, just a lot of things she went through. And actually, I knew you at the time, and you were a big support for me. But I had always toyed with this idea. I've just seen so many things. I was a note taker, so I journaled a lot of just ideas and things I wanted to replicate. I read a lot. So I like books that feel a little didactic because I want to be told sort of what to do, but I didn't want to write a book like that. I thought we just need I thought of kind of the way Jesus taught that, it's just, he gave allegorical kind of lessons, if you will, kind of, it would be parables. And so maybe I could write a story of all the things I've learned. And so as a kid, I had this fantasy world I went to as a child, knew it's real. And I was Pete, the monkey. And that was kind of the way I dealt with life. And so I just used that as the foundation. I will say to anybody listening, if you think you're a writer and you haven't really been trained as a writer, you're not a writer. I was not a writer. I went through a lot of difficulty learning. I did the work. I did get an editor. I called him Darth Editor. He was a wonderful guy, but he was hard on me. So I did my best to write the book, but the story was the key. And the story really is allegorical. And so it was while my wife was going through the treatment that last time, and I was in a hospital looking at a cup of coffee, and I'm thinking of all the realities of life. And I'm thinking, who's here to pass that on? Like the things you lean into when you're really struggling. And so I wrote it around the 5 roots, and that's what the book talks about. Faith, you got to know what you believe in. What is your faith? What is that you don't have empirical evidence about that drives you? Everyone has faith in something. What is your faith? Family, You must have family, that circle around you. I talked about that concentric. So there's a piece of that in the journey of family. But just as important is fellowship. Those people that are outside of that family circle that you spend a lot of time with, people like yourself that come alongside you, that become very connected, speak into you. That's the human experience. That fellowship piece is super important. And then food is the fourth one. And think of food as fuel. What is it to fuel yourself with? Because how we fuel ourselves is how we perform. It's just like athletes, you perform like you practice. The same with us. If we don't feed our minds and body with the things that make us perform well, when the stress hits, we have nothing to fall back on. And that's really the food component. How do you fuel yourself? And the last one is probably the most important, or equally important, is forgiveness. That's something you spoke about earlier. And I think that's one of the human conditions that bothers me the most. And I believe if we can go back to the Timken comments, I think I'm totally in alignment. We have this zero-sum mentality. Like, I have to be right and you have to be wrong. You see it in everything if you turn on the news, you see it everywhere. So much anger, so much, I can't get along with you. I actually don't see it that way at all. I would actually say many of my closest friends, I probably don't align with that much in politics or whatever. That's wonderful, because I love them as a person. We know each other. Yeah. That's really the part. And that comes from learning to forgive not only others, but yourself. You can't carry your burdens along the way. And so this story talks through that. And it has this, at the end, how the story comes together, and the patriarch and the matriarch and what happens. But that's really why I wrote it. And I'm hoping that people that get it, and when I speak to small groups, it's like, take this and make it your journey. You will find morsels in there that you can develop yourself. It's not written to be like the absolute, I know I'm not that guy, but it really does. I think it helps people refer back to growing in their own path. If I can do anything at the end when I'm finished, and you've probably read the poem about the dash, I actually think about the ellipses after my life. It's like, who carries on after me? Who's going to say, I knew him, I'm better because of that. Mm-hmm. I just because I knew Steve, and I write as S. Mosby Marble, so you may see that it's because that's my mother's maiden name. But I knew S. Mosby, or I knew Steve, and I'm better because of it, or I learned because of it, or because he was authentic and transparent, and he actually came and apologized to me once. I will tell you, I probably said I'm sorry to more employees than most people think is appropriate, because there's times when you wrong someone for whatever reason, be big enough to say, you know what, I know that felt bad. That was not my intent. I'm sorry. That's a simple thing to say to people. And it starts breaking down this whole hedge we build of, I'm on this side, you're on that side, therefore we just can't get along. It's just not true. We have a lot in common. So that's why I wrote the book. And I try to speak to it. I will say this, it evolves as we go. I actually speak to the recipe I have in here. Sometimes I say that letter can mean other things now, because it's, it changes over time.
I'll tell you guys what, who are listening, if any of you want a copy of Steve's book, let me know, and I'll gladly buy it retail from Amazon, so Steve gets his full credit. and I'll get copies of that book in your hands. It's an amazing book. I had the privilege of reading that book before it came out as a fully published work, and I could tell you that it's a special book. And if you want to check out something I think we could all learn from and grow with, I think that there's some really good takeaways from there that we can apply to our own lives every which way. So let me know, hit me up for a copy, and it'll be on its way to you.
Thanks, Marc.
Steve, you've talked a lot about, your personal beliefs and kind of the desire for authenticity, but you also a second ago alluded to the fact that you apologize to people at work more than perhaps even others. So you kind of bringing your work self and your kind of your personal self into this idea a little bit. I would love to tap for a second, while we're really here, not to talk about one, we'll call it persona or role, in life, or the other. But is there an anecdote that comes from, your decades of work that you could look back on and go, boy, this is a place that I applied this belief that we're all people at the end of the day, and we all have kind of a need to connect and to serve and to be helpful and to be rewarded for that. Is there a story you can share with me that you saw that come to life in a really favorable way, where it really lit somebody up, or it made somebody feel like, boy, it empowered them, or it made them feel like superheroes in a work setting, although this was more of a human need?
Yeah. there's a number of stories, and the one I'm thinking of may not be quite so enlightening as far as superhero, but I think it's very telling in the human experience. So some things I live by, I write this in the book too, is like, you can only control what's within your control. I know it's anecdotal, simple, right? But we try to control things outside of our control and get frustrated. No reason to do that. That's just key. I also believe we really overlook the value of an intentional pause. When in doubt, just leave it out. Take a break, take a breath, assess. Like sometimes the best reaction is no action at all. I say that all the time. Like sometimes you're in a room, and we may talk about the faith-based world later. Like working now in a Christian organization, I see emotion is much stronger than what I saw in the for-profit space. And the mantra I live by with that group was like mission over emotion. We can't allow our emotion to get in the way. We have a mission to do. Let's stay on the mission, because emotion gets in the way. But the story that makes me think of just seeing human experience personified in a leadership team is actually not something I did. I do think I spoke into this leader, but I saw a leader do this, and I just thought, wow, if you ever want to, as a leader, look back and say, I made a difference. This was in one of my contact centers. I had a senior manager there, very good with the teams, had a relatively large team, and there was a tragedy with the child of one of the employees, and it was a horrible situation. Wow. And I was involved in the community, knew about it, and the day the tragedy happened, the person, the mother of the child, her first stop, they couldn't find her. Like, where did she go? She came back to the office and found that manager and went into the office for support. That's where she went for support, because that manager had spoken into her so much over the years and invested in her to say, you actually matter. You matter to me, and knew her on a level that said, I'm developing you personally and professionally. Now, I'm not suggesting we get in people's personal lives, but when you offer, I'm here for you as a resource, because we are in a job to do the job. It's what we do. It's not who we are, right? Our jobs is what we do, but who we are has to come through. So that authentic relationship grew to the point that this person wanted to come back and see that manager. That one just sticks out to me as far as the reality of human experience. That strength is where they came. And then together they went and saw the rest of the family, and that manager stayed with this person for a while. There's circumstances obviously that made that situation unfold the way it did. But when you just reflect on yourself as a leader and ask yourself, do I make that kind of impact on people? And then, of course, there's risks that come with that, too. You have to learn the balance. You don't get it. I don't want to, I don't have a lot of personal relationships at work, but you do want to be there because you're their leader. And as the leader, there's certain levels of responsibility that come to encourage and to develop. And when I think encourage, by the way, I don't think about it me saying, well, Mark, you're a great guy, even though I think you're a great guy. I want to encourage what makes you Mark. Yep. Encourage those things about the person, those attributes that you can help grow. And as leaders, if we can learn, that's the human experience. Like, we're emotional, right? It's relationship. What makes us feel good? Because everybody's looking for hope. What makes me feel valued? What's my value proposition? A leader should help you uncover that. Because if you can find an employee that feels fully valued in their role, regardless of the role they're doing, you have a very high functioning employee that may have a solution that's innovative that changes your whole organization if you're listening. That's really, to me, and the same goes for customers. I will give you a customer, if you have a second. I can give you a really good customer experience.
Yeah, let's do it.
This just happened recently. Now, this is in the donation space. So we're children's poverty. So we have a lot of donors. And there was a gentleman who seemed frustrated. They escalate to me if they seem frustrated beyond, the typical tier, right? So this person was frustrated and wanted to speak to someone because he did not feel like he was being heard, basically. And I won't get into the details, but he had been sponsoring children with us for over 4 decades. Like, it was an amazing number. So I took the time to call this person. And the first thing I said was, I would love to hear your story. And about 25 minutes later, we're talking about what he was frustrated about, which was no longer what he was frustrated about. Because what I learned was, and I've known this over the years, you need to get to know the customer. What is it that's driving them? And what he was trying to say to us in his frustration was, I have this passion that I don't feel is being fulfilled the way I am sponsoring anymore. How do I make that connection work? But until I let him tell me his story of 40 wonderful, amazing years, super professional, successful person, then I understood what he was trying to do. And then at the end, I could say, hey, I believe we can connect with you this way. And that's really all he wanted to do. That's what we have to learn in the human experience space. There is no magic pill. There's no single way. It really comes to listening, being empathetic, paying attention. That's the kinds of things that make us, I believe, successful.
You know, you've used one word, and well, there's a lot of words, but one that really recently has been on my mind, and that's connection.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I think at the end of the day, we all are human beings, and we're wired in our DNA to want to connect with other people. You know, we're social creatures. You know, we're not designed to live alone.
Right.
And I was mentioning to you before we started the show, I said there's an irony. I said, you know, at least in my life, I'll fully admit that I probably spend way too much energy in social media. You know, probably to a point where it's marginally unhealthy, or at least my wife would say so. And I remember thinking when software like Facebook was a new thing 20 years ago, you know, everybody said it's going to bring the world together. And I think, you know, it's kind of strange. It kind of separated us from other people, right? It caused us to feel like we have to be better than we are, to look more beautiful than we are, or more adventuresome than we are, have better lives or faster cars or bigger homes or whatever that crazy standard is, so we could, quote, compete amongst the rest of the Facebook people out there, which is bananas when you stop and think about it, right? And then, you know, I'm an Apple guy. I mentioned, you know, they came out with one of those virtual reality headsets recently, right? And you look at the ads for that thing, and it's like a man and a woman at home in their living room, sitting on their living room sofa, each having this headset on, completely isolated from one another, right? Because they're in their own little world, their own little virtual reality world there. Even if they're pretending to interact with the same media through this device,
Right.
They're physically separated from one another by having this headset on. And I think that just works against what we need as people, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really is shared experiences. I mean, we have to share, I believe, my opinion, but my experiences show me that we as humans really need to share the experience, which I believe is what social media does. It allows us to share a virtual exposure of that experience. But then what that is not necessarily real.
Right.
We create facades and, you know, our own little memes. And so it's what we want people to see. But really true experience, I believe true relationship comes from the vulnerabilities. It's transparency. It's from finding the warts and the problems and working through those together. When you go through that pain together, you build that strength of relationship that sustains the stormy waters, right? That's what takes you there. And so we have to find a way to bridge it. I'm not giving up on it, but like yourself, I am seeing that we're diverging from the reality of experience. We're virtualizing it. And the problem that we can see with technology is you don't have the emotional component. So we're losing that emotional perspective, and we have to really monitor that and figure out how to bridge that. I'm not at all against technology and AI. I love the tools we have, but we have to find a way to deploy them in balance, I believe, or we wind up losing the most important part of who we are. What separates us is our emotion, the feeling side of the right brain, what it is that how we feel and engage artistically and create, and those things we can do. Well, if I just go to a tool and say, do this for me, it gets done. It's a task. I get that little endorphin rush that it maybe was completed, but I don't get that completeness. I don't believe that I did it. Take writing the book as an example. It was very hard. It's never going to be a super success. I'm not ever thinking it's going to be something major, but it's a story I wanted to tell, and I succeeded at it. I felt that void that I did something I wanted to complete. I could have probably had an AI tool do some of that for me. I wouldn't have felt the same about it, because I can remember all the rewrites and when I accidentally delete a chapter, things I did, those are things that make our story who we are.
No, it's interesting. You're talking about thinking versus feeling, left brain versus right brain.
Yep.
I've given away a bunch of books over the last 4 or 5 years. One in particular called Descartes' Error.
Yeah, I've read it.
Right, where people are getting which side of the brain comes first, right? Where's the control? Are we really thinking creatures who feel, or are we really feeling creatures who think?
Yeah.
Right. And to understand what that really means and what formulates our motivations and our drivers and how we try to live.
Yeah.
Steve, from where I sit, you've had a heck of a journey, but I want to talk about something with you for a second here, which you touched upon a second ago. You opened this Pandora's box when you mentioned AI a moment ago. I've done other shows here over the last couple of months where I make the claim there's probably nothing bigger in our professional customer lives than AI and the implications of that. But at the same time, there is an increasing need to connect and empathize and understand and be a feeling being and not just a thinking being. I don't care how good AI gets, it's not going to feel. And at the end of the day, if we're going to establish that the concept of the human experience has roots in feeling, and yet we see this tidal wave of AI coming at us and how we connect with, quote unquote, connect with our customers. Now, AI is supposed to, first maybe supercharge these connections, and then, in a really sort of disappointing way, take the human out of the experience over time. And I think that that's a potential recipe for disaster, at least if we believe that there's goodness in connection, in authenticity and in connection, which you can't fake. Right? It doesn't happen. Right? Do you see? I mean, I'm seeing it as almost like this year, next year, it's like these two tsunami-sized storms, AI on one side and the need to have these human experiences on the other side, are converging on each other, and they're going to smash into each other at some point. Yeah. And one's going to win, and I don't know at this point who, but it just feels like it's going to be an interesting wrestling match between those two sides to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's a deep question, right? We all talk about it. It's on every conversation I seem to have. I do believe initially the thinking was that technology would be really used to elevate the human experience. I think that I believe our goals are true to make it a better experience. I mean, that we talk about it all the time. I think the challenge, as you said, though, is how do you enable deeper connections and develop trust and amplify that human potential or human emotion with technology? Because what the human experience brings is culture, psychology, emotion, all those components that emotional interaction is just not going to come from tech alone. I do believe it is a balance. There's a hybrid I believe we have to find, because you can have a chatbot that will respond quickly and certainly it can give you your answer, but the human component is understanding maybe what's not being said or the emotion of your response or how you feel about it. And that's I think where the challenge comes from. I think for me, if I were to think about where technology may go, I agree. We're sort of at this gulf where they're on each side. We're trying to figure out what truly, I come from the human-centric experience. I think that's what we have to be. What drives that? How do we deliver that? We have to get to it's still experience first decision-making. Like we have to think from the experience perspective, which is going to be a bit foreign to the logical approach of code writing. Like it's just if-then statements, if you will. It's just logic. So I'm a storyteller. You probably can tell that. I'm all about stories. And I think stories are what fulfill us as community. It makes us feel connected. It's who we are. So when you think of like sentiment analysis, which we're all doing, you can take sentiment analysis and make it so data-driven and tactical that you lose the emotion of the sentiment. So you have to keep that story in it. You got to figure out the story. So if I'm given any advice, and I'm probably not worthy of giving advice, I would say as we think more down the paths of like augmented reality, which kind of concerns me some, you'll never really augment emotion into tech. At least I haven't seen. I shouldn't say never, because who knows what they'll design, but I can't imagine that ability to feel emotion. So we have to find that way. I believe some of it will come from governance, guardrails. I don't know that you can see. I don't know how you train technology to ever have that emotion. Yeah, you can train technology to recognize and respond. So we have to have the human oversight. So I actually call it a micro. I say you have to give a hoot. Human oversight of technology. And so we always have to have human oversight. In our world, where I'm at, we're very cognitive of it because we are a nonprofit, we are faith-based, so we're super careful. But there are values. You can use tools for training scenarios. It's awesome. You can use it to give you first pass quality analysis, but you still need the human to come in and say, thank you, you saved me 80% of the time, but I'm going to take it that last 20% because I'm bringing that human element. If we find that balance, we just become more efficient. The best news would be get more time for us to do things. But the question is, what do you do with the time?
Yeah.
That would be probably my question.
Fascinating. Steve, we're going to get close to wrapping up here, but I have a question I wanted to ask you that I love asking other folks on this show in the past. Is there a company, a brand, a person that comes to your mind that really inspires you, whoever it might be, past, present, historical, that you take your inspiration from? I would love to hear a little bit about who really inspires you. I'm going to try to guess, but you go and tell me the answer.
Well,
right.
Yeah, I could tell on a personal level, I was very inspired by Dick Robinson, the CEO of Scholastic. Sadly, we lost Dick a few years ago, but I was fortunate enough to work, and you met Dick at Scholastic, and I worked close to him in the CX space, and we developed kind of that together. But Dick was so committed to human experience, to people, to children, to literacy, and I learned a lot from that. From an organizational perspective, I just love Chick-fil-A's approach. Because even when you think drive-through, and I don't do a lot of fast food, but the way they approach it's still very human. And I travel a lot. Not that I'm necessarily saying this company's better than others, but in the human experience, I love the relationship I have with Delta, and I love the relationship I have with Hilton and Hertz. I'm very loyal to them because they give me tech when I want tech, but if I need human, they're there. I mean, it's pretty seamless. This omni-channel experience they've created has been works well for me. That works for me. You could go on and on. I will say, and people like Leora Russi, you and I both watched him early stages, right? I mean, yourself. I love that you and I stay connected because you are really, I see you as that thought leader in the CX space. You always give me like, what about? And I think that's always really helpful to keep people like that in your life. So, I mean, I don't know if that's a really good list, but those are definitely people that I monitor and watch what's happening. So hopefully that's
it's a good list. It's a far better list than I could have come up with in a moment's notice for sure. That's a darn good list. Steve, I'm sure people listening to this might want to reach out and say, how could they continue the conversation with you? What's the best way for people to track you down? Is it through email? Is it through LinkedIn? Is it some other way? What's the right way?
Yeah, I'm a bit of an enigma. I am not a super social media guy. Because I was in the space, I always stayed away. I don't have much of a social presence. Email would be the way. Now, as I evolve more and my work more as I get into speaking, and smosbymarble@gmail.com, quite simple. So it's just the letter S, MOSBYMARBLE@gmail.com is my email that I use for these kind of conversations. Love to get an email and connect. I do think eventually I'll probably be more socially present. I don't post anything in Instagram. I don't do anything in Facebook at this point. I think eventually I'm really committed to my trade still, so I'm very busy. I only do the book thing on the side and speak when I can. If I ever evolve into that as a repurposing, if you will, I might grow more in spaces. But right now, you can certainly find me at smosbymarble@gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from anyone.
Steve, thank you for everything that you brought to this conversation. You're one of the good guys out there, and you've always been. And I really want to say thank you for all that you do for me, and for the encouragement that you've given others, in this conversation. Thank you for that. And I think you're setting the right standard, in my opinion. You're setting the right benchmark of let's just treat each other like people. Not as customers, not even as good customers, not as good employees, just as people. And the more that we could break through that veneer of treatment, I think the better we'll be. And I think that's going to have to be our goal for all of us. Guys, Steve's one of the good guys. Get in touch with him. As I said, if you want a copy of Steve's book, it's a thought-provoking, encouraging book that gives you sit back and you read that book. It's not hard to finish, and you get through it and you go, huh. It gives you kind of a new way to think about things. And I want to encourage you to check that out. I think you'll be pretty enlightened by that. I know I was. Steve, thanks for hanging out today with my friends and me. You're welcome to hang out here for just 2 more minutes as we wrap up the show. I just really wanted to make sure that everybody who might be listening in, whether it be now on the live show, whether you want Steve's book or a copy of Carl's book here, just let me know. They'll be my gifts to you guys. I'll buy them for you and pack them up and ship them your way. So just let me know if you want one or even a couple of copies, and I'll get them to you. Also, as I mentioned at the onset of the show, for the Forrester event is coming up in less than a month now. It's just a month. It's going to be that 4th week of June, Nashville, Tennessee. As I said, it's going to be a be there or be square kind of event. And I hope that if you want to come, you do come. And if you haven't made arrangements yet, let me know, and I'll get you a discount to be able to get a pass for the conference. Can't make it free. They're not going to get me that, but at least it's a sizable discount, which I think will be helpful. Next month in June, I'm also going to be doing a special episode of one of these shows I do called Customer Experience Under the Hood with a gentleman who I really look highly to. His name is Martin, and he's the co-founder of a company called They Do. You may remember They Do from an earlier episode where Martin's business partner, Joachim, joined me, and we were talking about customer journey management. We're going to go really deep. Martin and we're going to start to really understand what is journey management about, how do you take advantage of that, and what does it really mean? How is it different than journey mapping or experience mapping or experience design or experience blueprinting? We're going to really start to unpack that in a few weeks. And so I'll put some dates out there for that. My friends, as always, without you here, there's no show. Thank you for being here with Steve and me in this case today. Also, I didn't mention at the onset of the show, I'm a little bit under the weather today. So thank you for tolerating my under the weatherness during the conversation. But as I say, the show must go on. Mm-hmm. So I'm here to make sure that we didn't miss one. Steve, thanks again, man, for hanging out with my friends and me. And my friends, thank you for hanging out with Steve and me. We'll see you guys again soon. Thank you for everything, and keep the journey going, guys. Bye-bye now.